Welcome to Conversations. I'm Suresh Kochatal. Today, we will look at a project that is going to change India's future. And that's not small. It is one of the most ambitious and contentious infrastructure plan. I'm talking about the Great Nicobar Project at the Galicia Bay in the Andamans. Valued at roughly 72,000 crore rupees, that is at the present rates, this project plans to propose to turn Great Nicobar, the southernmost island of the Andamans and Nicobar chain, into a major transshipment and economic hub, while strengthening India's strategic footprint in the Indo-Pacific. Now, the question is, why is India building a port here at the Galicia Bay, more than 1,300 kilometers from the Indian mainland? The answer has to do with the Malacca Straits. The Malacca Straits is one of the most strategically important waterways in the world. It's about 900 kilometers long and connects the Indian Ocean with the Pacific Ocean through the South China Sea. This is really important because something like this, 93,000 ships pass through Malacca Straits every year, and more than 23 million barrels of oil pass through the Malacca Straits every single day. The reason that India is building this port here is that this allows for the transshipment of the Indian cargo destined for Indian ports here to the east coast from the Galicia Bay. Until now, all the cargo coming to the Indian ports, especially the big container carrying ships like this, would stop at places like Colombo or Port Klang in Malaysia, of course Singapore. From here, they would be transshipped in smaller ships to the Indian ports because the Indian ports do not have the adequate depth or facilities. Of course, we recently saw the commissioning of the Vizhinjam port in Kerala, which is a transshipment port today, a very important one on the western coast. It can take in massive container ships, and of course, the idea behind launching Vizhinjam was that. Now the question is, what will happen when we start this project at the Galicia Bay? The Indian cargo that is meant for India will be dropped at Galicia, and from here they would be transshipped to the Indian mainland India. The government of India believes that this could save something like $250 million every year. This is the reason why this port becomes really important for transshipping Indian cargo. And that's not it all. There's going to be a military side to this port facility as well. Of course, there are 5 important naval and air force ports already in and around the Andamans. And some of them are said, some of them are unsaid. In fact, the Chinese Navy uses the Malacca Straits for not only patrolling into the Indian Ocean, but it's also a very important energy lifeline for the Chinese economy. And that is one of the reasons why India wants to have a presence over here in the southern tip of the Nicobar Islands. And that's one of the primary reasons that Galicia project is now going to be commissioned in 2028. And when it is done, it will be a big, big thing. The first phase of the project, that's what I'm talking about. And the rest of them follow in the subsequent years. I think it goes on till 2070 or something like that. This port, in fact, is important not just from a strategic perspective, from a transshipment point, but also from a strategic military point of view as well. If the project happens as it should, we would not only build a deep water transshipment bay, able to handle millions of containers every year, an international airport, a 450 megawatt power plant, and a new township to house thousands of residents and workers. Proponents of it call a game changer, a way to reduce dependence on foreign transshipment hubs, create thousands of jobs, and bolster the maritime security at the mouth of the Malacca Strait, the narrow waterway through which something of 40% of the global trade moves every year. But almost from its launch in 2021, the project has sparked a widespread opposition from environmentalists, conservationists, and of course, indigenous rights advocates, who warn of irreversible damage to sensitive ecosystems and threats to tribal communities, and risk that large Indian-scale dredging and construction would worsen the ecological fragility of this seismically active zone. Political critics, of course, have some opinion or the other, and these have been amplified over the years, turning the project into something of a national debate about development, security, and conservation. Sonia Gandhi recently wrote a piece in the Hindu about it. And that, of course, is a big question because people are asking why Sonia Gandhi has an objection of all the things to this project. And second, why did the article appear in Hindu of all the publications? You can just connect the dots. To understand why this remote island matters so much, we need to have short geography. We need to have a geographical lesson, a strategy lesson on this. The Andaman and Nicobar archipelago stretches roughly about 750 kilometers north to south. 1,527 islands is in this combined chain, and only about 31 are inhabited. The Great Nicobar itself covers around 921 square kilometers, slightly larger than the city-state of Singapore, and is positioned close to the southern approaches of the Malacca Strait. It gives a unique strategic significance. Maritime strategists describe the Malacca Strait and the adjacent channel as a choke point and narrow corridor through which a vast amount of volume of east to west trade passes. Control or effective monitoring of such a choke point affects not just the commerce, but also the naval mobility. Nations that can reliably project presence and surveillance at these points can cash in the influence of trade, security, and regional balance. For India, a development port and an airfield in Great Nicobar would mean faster operational turnarounds for naval and coast guard vessels, enhanced surveillance reaching into the eastern Indian Ocean and the Indo-Pacific, and of course a logistical hub that could partly replace foreign transshipment dependence currently served prominently by ports in Colombo and Singapore, as I mentioned before. These strategic arguments are rooted in a long-standing defense policy. After the security reviews following the Kargil conflict, India decided to raise the Andaman force, the Andaman and Nicobar Command as it's called today, an integrated theatre command meant to coordinate Army, Navy, Air Force and Coast Guard efforts across the archipelago. Planners argue that the infrastructure, ports, airports, reliable power and roads are prerequisite for an operationally effective presence. Yet the project is not about military reach. Officials also admit it frame a development plan with modern airports and ports would spur tourism, improve healthcare access and emergency evacuations, and offer economic opportunities to the islanders. Advocates for the cause stress that the island's residents, mainly clustered on a handful of islands, would benefit from the improved connectivity and services. At the same time, critics point out that the island's rich biodiversity and small indigenous populations are under threat. The indigenous Champagne community of the Great Nicobar numbered about 238 in 2011 census, and projections suggest only a slight decrease since then. Critics say that the large construction projects, increased traffic and ecological disturbance would displace these communities, erode the traditional ways of life and disturb breeding grounds for species such as sea turtles. The administration maintains that the environmental clearances was granted only after due diligence and mitigation measures, including compensatory afforestation as a part of the plan. Government officials also point out that a portion of the island's forest cover remains high compared to many other parts of India and argue that responsibly planned development with modern seismic resilient construction techniques can minimize disaster risk in this earthquake-prone zone. Environmentalists counter that, and they say the compensatory planting on the mainland of India cannot replace the unique ecosystems that the coastal habitats have in Great Nicobar. They warn that the dredging required for deep water port can alter the currents, damage the coral reefs, and of course, change sedimentation patterns with downstream effects on fisheries and shoreline stability. Some also highlight that the fragility of the island ecosystem in the face of climate change and rising sea levels. Reconciliation of these competing priorities, security, development, and conservation, is a central policy. And that's a challenge. Experts say rigorous, transparent environmental impact assessments, meaningful consultation with the indigenous communities, and of course, enforceable mitigation plans and continuous scientific monitoring are essential. They also recommend that any compensatory measures be credible, long-term, and independently audited. Civil-military coordination will be an important part of this, as well as the human side of it. Local recruitment, such as territorial units drawn from the island's communities, and the continuity of the administrative services for tribal affairs are cited by officials as tools to protect the traditions and, of course, provide local voices a role in the governance. For critics, effective safeguards mean legally binding protection for tribal lands, strict limits on relocation, and independent grievance redress mechanism. There are also comparative lessons from global transshipment and port cities like Singapore and Hong Kong. These places combine strategic location with rigorous urban planning. Environmental management is important where possible, and of course the integrated logistics to become a global node. Yet, each comes with its own environmental and social costs. Policymakers say that India must learn from the examples that I quoted now while tailoring the safeguards for local ecology and communities. Finally, the larger geopolitical context cannot be ignored. The Indo-Pacific has grown into a theater of competition and cooperation. India's move to strengthen the presence on the eastern Indian Ocean is framed as a part of a broader agenda to support free, open, and inclusive Pacific through surveillance, humanitarian assistance, capabilities, and assuring trade lanes secure and accessible ones. So where does that leave the Great Nicobar Project? It is, in short, a project at the intersection of national security, economic ambition, and of course, environmental stewardship. Backers see this as a long-term strategic investment that could bring economic dividends and operational depth to India's maritime posture. Opponents warn that irreversible damage, that is the ecological damage and the cultural displacement, without stronger protections and clearly enforceable guarantees, will make it a mess. The decision now rests on whether the planners, policymakers, and communities can bridge these divides by strengthening the impact assessments, commitment to building protections for indigenous people, investing in resilient and low-impact engineering, and ensuring transparent oversight at every stage. For a project that aims to secure India's interest at a vital gateway for global trade, finding that balance will determine whether development and conservation can truly proceed together. We will follow these developments closely in the days to come and look at the environmental reviews, community consultations, and any shifts in the project's design and mitigation plans. This is a story that combines national strategy with local lives, and its outcome will shape not only the future of Great Nicobar, but India's role in an increasingly contested and interconnected maritime world. At the end of the day, this project will change the way the world will look at India, or the way India looks at the world. Thank you for watching. Jai Hind.